In the last lecture, we started working on implementing the functionality for Login API. And there, we implemented the functionality where we are trying to find the user with a given username in the user table. Now, in this lecture, we are going to work on the functionality where if a user is found with a given username, we need to compare his password, which he provided during login, with the hashed password, which is saved in the database for that user. So basically what we want is from the client, the user is going to send a login request, and that login request will be handled by the login API. Now first, this login API is going to check if a user with a given username provided during login is present in the database or not. If the user is present, the login API is going to get the hashed password for that user from the database, and in the request, the login API is going to receive the plain password for that user. So now this login API has to compare this plain password, which is provided during login, with the hashed password, which is saved in the database for that user. So for that, we have created a function called compare in the bcrypt provider, and that function is going to compare the plain password provided during login with the hashed password saved in the database. So if this comparison returns true, that means the user is a valid user and the login API is going to sign in that user. And after sign in, it is going to send an access token in the response. But if the comparison returns false, that means the user is not a valid user. He is not who he claims to be. And in that case, this login API should return access denied. Let's see how we are going to implement this. So let's go to VS Code. And here inside this login method of this auth service, after we have found the user with a given username, what we are going to do is first I'm going to create a variable called is equal, and the value of this variable is going to be a boolean value, and initially let me set it to false. Okay, next what we are going to do is we are going to call the compare method of hashing provider. So inside this auth service, we are going to inject an instance of hashing provider. So here, let me go and let me create a private read-only field, and I'm going to call it as hashing provider, which is going to be of type hashing provider. Okay, and here we need to use a comma like this. And now let's go and let's use this hashing provider. So let me scroll down, and here at this line, I'll say this dot hashing provider dot compare password. And to compare the password, we need to pass two things. First, we need to pass the plain password. Plain password we can get from login DTO. So here you can say login DTO dot password, and the hashed password from the database we can get it from this user object, because this user object is going to store the user which we have retrieved from the database. So this user object has a password property which is going to store a hashed password. And this compare password method, it is going to run asynchronously. So let's use this await keyword in front of that, and it is going to return us a boolean value. So we want to assign that boolean value to this is equal variable. So if the password match, this compare password will return true, but if the password does not match, this compare password will return false. Now we are going to check if is equal is false. That means the password did not match. So for that, let me also use this not keyword in front of this. So if the password does not match, this is equal will be false, and since we have used this not operator in front of it, this condition will return true. In that case, what we want to do is we want to throw a new exception. So for that, I'll say throw new, and here we want to throw an unauthorized exception. Okay, and in the exception message we will simply say incorrect password. Okay, but if this is equal is true, that means the password matched. In that case, we want to send a success response. So in that case, the user should be logged in and we want to send a success response. So here what I'm going to do is the response, the object which we are returning from here, there I'm going to return an object, and there I'll say data is the user object, and message, or maybe here I'll say success as true, And then let's also say message. And here let's say user logged in successfully. Now, this is not the exact implementation which we want, but for the testing purposes, this should be fine. So let me save the changes here. Let's go to the Postman and let's try this login endpoint one more time. But this time I want to use a different user. In this case, I want to use MarkWatt12 username because for this user, we have a hashed password. So I'm going to use this username. Okay. So if I provide a wrong password for this user, let's say test12345, and if I send this request, here you say we have this 401 unauthorized response, and in the message you can say it says incorrect password, which is correct. So the password is test1234. And now if I send this login request, in the response we have 200 OK, and we have also received the details of the user who is trying to log in. So you can see success is true and message is user logged in successfully. So this compare password method, it is properly comparing the password. That's why we have this success response. Now the next and final part is once the user is successfully validated, that means if the user with the given username is present and if the password provided by him during the login matches, that means the user is a valid user and we want to log in that user. And for login, what we are going to do is in the response, we are going to send an access token to the client from where the user is trying to log in. And that access token will be used as an identity for that user for accessing the protected resources. And for the access token, we are going to use JSON Web Token. And we will learn about JSON Web Token and what it is in our next lecture. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.